This is episode 681 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, hope you had a good weekend, and especially, I know we're talking about the Super Bowl here. Neither of us had a dog in the fight, so to speak.
No, and I when you don't have a dog in the fight, you always want it to be a good game. And it was a good game to the extent that, boy, to have a team like Kansas City be so totally dominated by a defense in that first half, it was a sight to behold. So, yeah. And, the commercials, I used to get more excited about the commercials than I do now. I'm like, I don't even care. Is it that the commercials aren't as good? I think so. Is it I'm getting older and grumpier? Possibly. So,
Well, we were up at Purgatory Ski Resorts up in Durango. I only watched parts of the Super Bowl, as I too had no dog in the fight. I did see some of the commercials. I missed the Doge, the Elon Musk commercial. I didn't see any of those. There was one right after the game from an energy entity that basically it was a hospital scene, and there was a woman about to give birth, and they had a room in the hospital that was devoid of any products created by oil and gas, and it was basically an empty room.
Yeah.
And they start talking about all the stuff that was required for oil and gas to make a modern hospital room work, and that was, I thought, quite effective, although it was like right after the game before the Super Bowl award ceremony. Of course, Trump getting a big cheer. I'm not the biggest Taylor Swift fan in the world. My daughters even have kind of gotten over the Taylor Swift thing. I don't think it's nice to boo the lady, but regardless, it was great to see Donald Trump getting a very positive reception there, the first sitting president to attend a Super Bowl. You can just feel America's kind of back, though. It is good.
Well, and poor Taylor, you have to figure it's not everyone who goes to the Super Bowl. In fact, probably only about half of them are true fans of one team or the other. So you have to figure that a quarter of the folks would be have to boo her if they were Philadelphia fans, just because she's so closely associated with
That's true.
a certain tight end who did not have his best game, by the way. But that's a little redundant. Yes, poor Kansas City. We'll see if they come back, because the other thing about football is we've shown in the NFL yet once again how difficult it is to win time and time again. That is a very competitive league at the top.
Yeah, and while us Steelers fans had very little in the way of things to cheer for in this Super Bowl, as the only franchise to win 4 out of 6 Super Bowls over a short time span, and 2 back-to-back, but never a so-called three-peat,
Right.
trademark Pat Riley, I believe.
Yeah.
It was great to see that not come to pass for the Kansas City Chiefs.
So if we say three-peat, and we've said it twice, I wonder how much we owe Pat Riley. Hopefully it's not too much.
Yeah, and Super Bowl.
Pat, you were really good for a guy who was slow and mean. Those were your only attributes as an athlete. But he played the NBA quite a while and certainly coached it for a long time.
Yeah, Super Bowl. That's another one that'll get you in trouble. The big game.
The big game involving what can we say, NFL? I don't know. It's like, yes, it's gone a little bit crazy. But also, what I do like is, unlike more and more in sports, they made the Super Bowl pretty easy to get. It's on network TV. They had it on streaming options, for free, and so that's good to see. And it could have been remembered as the biggest Super Bowl ever, but it wasn't.
Nope. So, all right. Well, there are obviously a lot of things happening in New Mexico, particularly in the legislative session, and we'll just hop into that. It's not all legislative, but it is, we of course we're talking about the Super Bowl, but right now, as we talk, we are in the end of the first period, more like a hockey game. So we are 1/3 of the way through
Yes.
the legislative session, about 20 days out of the 60 days that we're in. And so far, we're cautiously optimistic that things are going in a maybe not a positive direction, but not as negative as they could be, which is pretty much the gold standard for New Mexico's legislature in its current state. Uh, we're just hoping for nothing earth-shattering that's going to chase businesses out of New Mexico and jobs and economic growth. So, very low bar for what's happening in Santa Fe. But my first topic is Medicaid expansion. This is Medicaid Forward. And the piece of legislation we're talking about is HB 186, rated -8 in the Freedom Index the Rio Grande Foundation puts out. So if this does hit the floor, it will receive the top negative score for our Freedom Index, increasing the size of Medicaid, which is a uh, government program for health care for uh, low income people, theoretically speaking. This bill would actually eliminate those caps on income levels and make New Mexico's already biggest in the nation as a percentage of population, Medicaid population, much, much bigger. In fact, did you know, Wally, that if this budget passes, the governor's budget, they are asking for $15.5 billion total for Medicaid, with a general fund of only 10.9. So speaking of thirds, we're talking about another third bigger than New Mexico's general fund just for Medicaid alone. Now,
Now,
to,
is that the total cost, the Fed cost and the state
that is the
cost?
total federal and
Yeah.
state cost
So
in New
yeah,
Mexico.
yeah. In
70% of which is funded by the feds.
yes, which could go down too in the future, and just think about how that. So it used to. They have changed the split between feds and states on Medicaid many times over the past few decades, and in these times of maybe taking a look at budget cuts, and when Paul, when you talk about cutting quote unquote entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, those are the political footballs beyond compare. But Medicaid, maybe not so much. And the feds could say, we're not cutting Medicaid. We're just sharing with the states a little more equitably how that's funded. Always a big problem. But if things continue how they are, this is just the New Mexico way. Our most valued dollars are federal dollars.
Yeah, and obviously this bill, as it is currently formulated, would require the federal government to be willing to expand how much money it pours into New Mexico's Medicaid system. I can think of few things that President Trump would be less inclined to do for a whole variety of, obviously economic reasons. Doge is going the opposite direction, attempting to cut back on federal spending. New Mexico was not friendly to Trump in any of his three runs for the presidency, and specifically recently when he attempted a campaign rally here that ultimately did happen, but the governor, the land commissioner, and the mayor of Albuquerque all attempted to make that not possible, not happen.
Yeah, we're not talking just New Mexico didn't vote for Trump
Right.
and he didn't get the electoral votes. We're talking about the politicians on the ground here in the great state, the land of enchantment, did make it easy for him to even come here and campaign. So
Yeah. So HB 186 has had its first hearing in the health department and health committee. It is a bill that I think I don't recall if the governor mentioned it in her State of the State address, but it's definitely a top priority for the so-called progressives in New Mexico's legislature. Uh, the thing that I think is truly telling about this is that you know Trump in the federal administration, there's no question I don't think they will give New Mexico the added financial backing in order to expand Medicaid in this way, I would be willing to bet that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden would have done it, though. But my real question is, if this is such a priority for our state, would New Mexico's legislators be willing to put up tax dollars from New Mexico? And this is
To make up the difference.
this well, not to make up the difference in this case. This would be the difference
Yeah.
because 70% of this money would have to be federal. I I just don't see it. The way the New Mexico legislators have worked, and specifically the Democrats who've controlled the state for a better part of 100 years, I think that they would be unwilling to move forward with this particular plan, absent the federal buy-in. So, uh, federal government does all kinds of bad things. One of the very worst is essentially bribing states to enact bad policies and allowing New Mexico to bring 70% of its uh, new money into the state of New Mexico from the federal government is just one of the very, very worst things that the federal government does. It's like if you want this, pay for it at the state level. We'll still work against it at the Rio Grande Foundation, but at least we're not getting this so-called free money effect, which is like waving a red banner in front of a bull in New Mexico.
Yes, and Paul, the other thing is that it the whole thing and this old sawhorse was trotted out during Obamacare debates, but it's proven to be more and more true is that health insurance is not health care. You need doctors, you need hospitals, you need professionals. It doesn't matter what plan you're on. If there's nobody there to see you, then what difference does it make? And the other is with New Mexico, legislature having a relatively strong influence from the trial attorney lawyers who are both elected and influence legislation and other things, it makes it tough to be a doctor in New Mexico, not a really good place to go. And more Medicaid, I do not think in any way makes that better. It makes it worse, no matter who pays for it.
Absolutely, yeah. We looked at the Oregon healthcare study and other studies of Medicaid uh, when the Obamacare expansion, which that was the primary means that Obamacare actually uh, acted in retrospect, was to expand Medicaid. Uh, there were a lot of reports and studies even before that was done that showed that Medicaid expansion was not effective as a health improvement tool, which theoretically is what it's supposed to do. But this and we have a great conversation, by the way. Philip K. Howard and I, who's an author and talks about government waste and spending. And of course, Medicaid is an entitlement along with Medicare and Social Security. And we could argue about the two entitlements that I think Trump, safe to say, has put off the table, Medicare and Social Security, and whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. Certainly politically, it was a good idea. I think financially and from the perspective of actual governance, it's a bad idea. But Medicaid, I think it's safe to say, if Doge and Trump and Elon Musk are serious, they need to really undertake a real reform of Medicaid. And that's where, quite frankly, the real money is, if that's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with your analysis is that politically that's a tough one to do.
Medicaid, you think?
No, Medicare
Oh, right,
and Social Security,
right.
those are tough to do. Medicaid, there is some ability. And we will wait and see. The results are not in, but we've found US aid some, I don't know if it's corruption or just idiotic spending, but if the early reports are to believe, there may be more fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicaid and Medicare and potentially Social Security. And so let me just highlight the difference between reducing the entitlement program. Yeah, there's a lot of people get Social Security checks that don't have Social Security numbers. There are a lot of people there's actuarially speaking getting up there pretty old, and it's really possible that they've passed away and that their ne'er-do-well children or grandchildren are really actually cashing their checks. So that will be fascinating to see. Now, boy, this is Washington D.C. It seems everybody, every idea, no matter how stupid, has a constituency. But I don't think fraud is has the biggest constituency in Washington. But we'll have to wait and see about that. You know, crime has a big constituency here in New Mexico. The trial lawyers like crime. Without crime, they would be out of business. So I hope there's nothing similar in Washington with regard to that, if and when they get around to figuring that out. And it seems like it's when, not if, based on what's happened the last 6, 8 weeks here in Washington.
All right. Well, we'll move on to, quite honestly, that was a pretty lengthy conversation of a very important and huge program here in New Mexico, and of course, one of those federal entitlements that needs to be addressed. But I'm glad we're both sitting down, Wale, or I'm glad you're sitting down at least. And dear listener, you may want to take a seat wherever you are because this story is just mind blowing. It is MLG. Lujan Grisham claims the mantle of education reform. Now, these are direct quotes from a interview that she did, the governor, with KOAT Channel 7 and the editorial board of the Albuquerque Journal. These, I haven't listened to the whole thing, but these are quotes directly from an article written by Dan Boyd and Matthew Reason at the Albuquerque Journal. With clock ticking on her tenure, Lujan Grisham calls out lawmakers, judges for approach to crime. Now, the real story here is the education side of things. And some of the things that this governor says are, well, first and foremost, even more lying than some of the other stuff she's talked about. But really, and she does have a moment of truth. It's just a really interesting smorgasbord of information. So let's go to this article. She says, on the issue of public schools, governor expressed frustration about a lack of transparency and how more than $4 billion in state funding is spent, saying it's up to local school boards to decide how dollars flow through the state's funding formula that are put to use. I have no power. This is a direct quote. I have no power over schools in the same way I can't tell judges what they should sentence, nor can I tell the police officers who to arrest, Lujan Grisham said. Now, that's the part where you should definitely be sitting for.
You're like, okay, my eyes are big now. So is she saying that she wants all of those things? Are we seeking Queen Lujan Grisham the first?
Let's just get past the lie here first and say the idea that the governor has no real control over the schools that she puts a budget up for and makes all manner of policies for, that she has no control over them, is nothing short of ludicrous. Now,
you know what she probably really means is that Mimi Stewart and the other education advocates in the legislature have the real power, not her.
Well, okay, yes. So there's that. So let's take this. This is onion territory. We're going to peel this thing apart.
There's a lot of facets.
On the outside layer is probably top of mind her being rebuffed by districts and judges and teachers unions and Rio Grande Foundation and basically the entire state, but especially rural New Mexicans over the 4-day, 5-day school week issue, which we've discussed ad nauseum here on this show. So there's that. Then I think, well, she goes on, and I'll just let the cat out of the bag because you definitely are right on something. She says, this is the governor again speaking from the Albuquerque Journal article. MLG claimed the House and Senate education committees, which are both led by current or retired teachers, have effectively bottled up many education initiatives in recent years. You got a lot of former educators and superintendents who aren't interested in changing anything, she said. The governor called it unethical and a huge conflict of interest for former and current educators to be voting on education funding and other initiatives as legislators. So I completely agree. Mark this moment down.
Yeah,
10,
100 agreement.
1039 on February 11th, 2025. That specific statement, I 100% agree with the governor on. Now, the question I have for you, Wally, and I'm not good. This is, you may think this is out of left field, but this is legitimate. Please tell me what education reforms this governor has proposed that have been unpopular with the teachers' unions and the Mimi Stewarts of the legislature, because I am at a loss. Everything she's done has been to just pour more money at it. The governor hasn't, to my knowledge, made a kind of a
Oh yeah,
bully pulpit plea to the public.
yeah, or had say we're giving you this money, but here's what we're going. Where there's more accountability, and we're going to keep
Exactly.
track. You know, maybe Paul, maybe that was honest. Let's say, let's just take it at face value. Maybe she would have meetings with the education caucus, and she couldn't even get her ideas to see the light of day in legislation. Maybe that's what she means, because she certainly hasn't used the bully pulpit of the governorship of New Mexico or the media or anything else to talk about anything. There's been almost no talk about educational attainment. It's always educational funding. That's all that's been talked about for the first 6 years of her administration.
Yeah, and just for the record, she got, of course, the pre-K programs that she and others on the left wanted.
Right.
She got free college. She's again made no notable efforts that I can see to really reform the K-12 system. She certainly poured a lot of money into that, but I, I'm at a loss in terms of what she has been rebuffed on. But God bless it, if she wants to go to war with Mimi Stewart, I'll saddle up and ride right next to the governor on almost any issue that the governor could possibly uh, because Mimi Stewart's wrong on everything. Let's just go with
Yeah.
that. The governor, by definition, is probably more likely to be right than Mimi Stewart on almost every single education policy issue. So, uh, it, these statements just, man, you could have knocked me down with a feather when I read this for the first time. I just can't believe uh, some of these things. And again, governor's got a half of a 60 or a 2/3 of a 60-day session and another 30-day. And Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, if somehow, some way you are listening to this show, if you would like to advocate for either school choice or Mississippi style accountability, I would love to work with you at the Rio Grande Foundation.
Yeah, and a final thing she might have meant is you guys told me if I gave you all this money, things would get better. And I gave you all this money and things didn't get better, which means uh, there really wasn't a whole lot of thought put into, what we need to do to make education better. We just, the New Mexico experience, and believe me, it's not worked broadly speaking. That's for sure. As we've made education more expensive, we haven't made it better recently here in our state.
No doubt. Well, Wally, I happened to go on Channel 7 KOAT this past week and discuss SB 268, which is being put forth by Senator Mo Maestas. And for the record, Mo is one of the more likable legislators up there. Used to be my representative there on the West Side. Uh, definitely progressive in most of his policy goals, but a reasonable guy. That doesn't mean we're going to agree with certainly everything he puts forth, and this is in that category. And I'll preface this by saying that I think you and I qualify as fairly big sports fans, including college athletics, although there are many different aspects to college athletics that probably could be reformed. But in this SB 268, Mo Maestas would like the taxpayers of the state of New Mexico to pay $5 million, $2.5 million to each of New Mexico's major Division I universities, UNM and NMSU, and directly fund their NIL programs, which essentially it's the way that they now recruit and pay college athletes. Uh, you're, I'm sure, familiar, but I'll
Oh,
briefly
yes.
go through.
Yeah.
There was a lawsuit that made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court by a college basketball player named Ed O'Bannon, who's played and succeeded at UCLA, didn't really flower in the NBA, but was being used on the cover of a video game, and he had no control over this. It was not uh, giving him any financial benefit, and so he went all
Just
the
the
way.
school, though, the school
Yeah, the
was
school
receiving.
was, and but he was long gone from the school, and he felt, hey, I should get some of this money, and so long story short, we now have from a time 10 years ago when college student athletes were not paid at all,
Except under the table.
college under the table, or given
How
the
God
room and board,
intended.
versus where now the Ohio State University national championship football team was paid no less than $20 million for their efforts on the field. So uh, whether you support NIL or not, we made the point many, many times on this show that if you want the Lobos, especially the football team, but the Aggies and basketball as well, to truly succeed and flourish on the court, we need a diversified economy where corporations step up and support these, and entrepreneurs and business
Yeah.
people step up and support these college athletic programs, not where you're essentially taking the oil and gas money generated by the state of New Mexico and pouring it into paying college athletes. Because if it starts at 5 million this year, it's going to be 10 million, 20 million, or so on, very, very quickly. And we need to stop SB 268.
Yes, this is fascinating that this got proposed in New Mexico, and you're right. So, Paul, I call this economic diversification because the few private businesses that are participating in the NIL system here in New Mexico are now being joined by the state of New Mexico if this passes. Um, we're in the words of the characters in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? We're in a tight spot here in New Mexico. I'm not sure we're ever going to have enough money to compete at the next level as NIL progresses. And we're not the only one. There's a couple ways to do it. One, you can have a very long history of being very, very good, and you become almost like a national brand where Nike and a bunch of big brands want to be associated with your program. You could be like Nebraska, where, boy, they care about Nebraska in Nebraska enough to where they probably can pour that in there, and at times it breaks into that national. Or you can be like New Mexico and Wyoming and, maybe Colorado State, not is associated with a big urban area, not necessarily a long term history of being absolutely great. And so you're going to struggle. And so, what will that mean? I think strategically, if you look out, right now we have Division One and Division Two. I think football in particular will split into at least a couple of divisions in Division One over the next decade. That's my guess. And by the way, this is no insult to the University of New Mexico or New Mexico State. The chances of them wanting or it being good for them to be in the top tier is very, very low. So, in the meantime, do we need to pay $3 million to even have another $3 million to even have or 5 or 10 or whatever to have a decent football program at state and UNM? Maybe we do. The other key is that, man, when you get rid of football, there's a lot of money to do a lot of other things, like really support your basketball programs, men and women's, have things like soccer that are up and coming. So I don't know. There's no easy answer, but this just doesn't seem like the right way to approach it.
Yeah, boy, a lot of nice points there, Wally. I will say, in general, Intermountain West football, college football, is not particularly strong. It's just a population dynamic to begin with.
And it's competitive. And by the way, historically, it's fun to watch.
Right.
But with the exception of BYU, who has ever
Well,
been,
Boise State is the
yeah,
other one.
yeah.
BYU goes back a few
Oh
years.
no,
I
they
mean,
go way back
yeah,
now.
that's
Yeah.
but yeah, Boise has been kind of the dominant Mountain West. And of course, Arizona State did make the franchise the college football playoff.
Yeah.
I look at Arizona as kind of the model for us. Obviously, New Mexico and Arizona used to be conjoined as a territory. Arizona missed out on all the oil and gas. We got all the oil and gas, and yet they have grown faster.
And they got all the private business
Yeah,
increases
yeah.
and almost no government. So
Yeah.
that's where they are.
So they've definitely grown and expanded that state economy, and they have much more competitive athletics programs for that simple reason. Yeah, the idea of the worst case scenario is to pour taxpayer dollars directly out of the oil and gas industry into college athletics. Does nothing to kind of address the broader economic issues and challenges. And again, it's just, you're right. You could abolish the Lobos football team. I don't think that's in the offing anytime soon, but you could do that.
And I wonder, by the way, about that. So these are the sort of things where if you invest all this money and then it goes from bad to worse, and now we need 10 million and 20 million, maybe it does. And my thought about there being multiple divisions, that's certainly a possibility,
Right.
but that's not a certainty. There's nothing on the table right now that I know of. So,
all right, well, we'll solve the budget and college athletic programs later on.
well, and when we get a good football coach, we usually keep them for 1 year.
Yeah. That's the Lobos. And I think Bronco Mendenhall is a fine coach. He probably was going to build something at UNM, but he came up with an opportunity elsewhere. Let's just read the headline of this Santa Fe, New Mexican piece, and then we can really dive into it. Lawmakers claim intimidation and bullying by opponents of paid family and medical leave. What were those nefarious people up to, and why is there a picture of yours truly right at the top of this article, Wally? Man, what are we doing to bully these poor, defenseless legislators? Well, I'll make the announcement this way. The Rio Grande Foundation is a 501c3. I am now also the head of RGF Action, a newly formed 501c4 that is a political action organization. And we delivered a mock up of postcard mailers to one representative's office. One model, if you will, one mock up said, thank you for voting no on paid family leave. You're awesome. Kudos. Great job. Thank you from your constituents. The other one was, you voted yes on paid family leave. You're nasty, and we don't like you very much. I'm being very facetious and very glib in the way I approach this, but basically, giving them, saying that you're killing businesses, etc. And that is the bullying and intimidation as it stands in a nutshell, which I call politics. In the idea that yes, people who support RGF Action, people who are conservative, people who run businesses, people who don't believe that the state of New Mexico should force businesses to pay this kind of tax and the employees to pay this kind of tax for a benefit that not everybody wants at a time when we have more money than we know what to do with. All of those things, that is what led us to oppose this. Now, this is a Santa Fe, New Mexican article by Daniel Chacon, and I encourage folks to read it. It's from Friday, February 7th. And it really, while a lot of the article talks about this little back and forth, it's mostly an analysis of paid family medical leave and why it's a bad idea. And I get to talk about that the whole time in the article. So for us, it's a huge victory. And it's a way that we can highlight that, yes, the Rio Grande Foundation now has a 501c4 affiliate And you can find our website, RGF Action, online as well.
Yeah, Paul, it wasn't that many years ago that in the New Mexico legislature, uh, there were legislators actually from the same party that would accuse each other of bullying because they would ask tough questions in committees of the sponsors of legislation, and that was deemed to be bullying. So evidently, the standard for bullying at the New Mexico legislature is relatively low. And you know, possibly the tolerance for political free speech is pretty low up there
Right.
as well because, we have a representative form of government where, we elect officials, but that doesn't mean that just when we elect them that there's not a right, and there certainly is a right to call on those legislators to say, "Hey, we think you ought to do this, or we think you shouldn't do that." That is part of the game. We don't elect them. Or let's just put it this way: they're sworn into office. They are not coronated. They don't become royalty that don't have to listen to their constituents after they're elected. And that's what some of this quote unquote bullying is. That you can listen to all of your constituents and then make your call and just know the nature of politics is if you put in bad policies and people believe you're responsible for those, sometimes it doesn't go too good at the ballot box. And then the final point is, where has the most bullying been has been on things like paid family leave, where some of the people that voted against it last time were actually primaried by the Democratic Party in New Mexico. So it's one of
Exactly.
those. So it's like, really? So this is bullying. What was that? So, and to their credit, I didn't hear the politicians on the D side who were primaried as for their votes on the last time on paid family medical leave whining. Maybe they did, and I just missed it, but that wasn't as prominent as something like this idiotic assertion.
Yeah, and the good news is that as it stands right now, paid family leave remains bottled up in the House Commerce Committee. We are a third of the way through the session, and there is plenty of time if they come to an agreement on a revised bill, which I think it's safe to say they don't have the votes currently, whether it's in this committee or in general, to pass the paid family leave as introduced. It's all about what can they get through the process. And I know you were at a dinner, and there was a lot of conversation about this particular issue. And it's really one of those things that while we all talk about democracy and transparency, these are very intense political discussions happening behind closed doors. On one hand,
Or even out in the open, but they're
right,
happening. A lot of them happen face to face. That's for sure.
yeah, but they're either talking about, well, what can representatives agree on and senators agree on that they would pass, and then kind of if you don't go along with us, what will you lose? What will the impacts be? I believe
Yeah.
obviously that wasn't happening at your dinner, but any light you can shed would be welcome.
Well, yeah. Just here's the thing: is that the the small business community in particular is just scared to death of this because of what it will mean to them in terms of not only the cost of it and some of the talking points I've seen about this are that it be the largest tax increase ever on New Mexicans because it creates this somewhere around $500 million fund. That's a lot of money anywhere, particularly when you're taking it out of the pockets of small businesses and employees. So there's that issue. But the other is that New Mexico is where there are a lot of businesses that are suffering still coming out of COVID. And why are we suffering? Well, there's been a lot of inflation, and depending on what your business is, you're being hit by inflation in wages, you're being hit by inflation in your goods that go into your products or the components that make up your services. And finally, our labor participation rate's really low. There's businesses, and one of the things at the dinner that I heard from a couple of industries, but all small business people, was how difficult it is to find and retain employees in our current environment, and how costly that is. And it's taking them to the point where, they keep having to raise salaries, raise them, but they're the point where their products are becoming so expensive, they're losing business from that. So they are literally between a rock and a hard place, and something else that's going to add a lot of costs. And the costs come in different forms. It comes in the cost of administering it. It comes up the fact that there will be this big new bureaucracy. And one of the things that just makes me smile, not a happy smile, but makes me smile, is that this is one of those programs as written. You got to pay into it for a while with no benefit of any kind. And
Yeah.
and then all of the hard stuff happens when the next governor takes over. So that's maybe why we haven't heard a lot of it from Governor Lujan Grisham, as she maybe doesn't care one way or the other. But this is a big bag of worms. And you know what? We're not a right to work state. We have a lot of legal problems. We have the gross receipts tax. And this is not going to be one of those where it's like, oh, New Mexico's getting their act together. Let's go there, because they just put in this onerous, expensive, and difficult to comply with paid family medical leave program.
Yeah. Uh, we'll just leave the last two items as follows. SB 23, the raise royalty rates, uh, passed out of a committee, Senate Conservation Committee. We testified against it. It's not a good bill. It increases taxes on oil and gas. New Mexico, according to the New Mexico Tax Research Institute, already has the greatest percentage share of total oil and gas production value directly contributed to government rather than the rest of where it otherwise would go. So what they're basically saying is that
Total taxes are the highest there.
taxes
Fees.
in New Mexico are highest overall on oil and gas. Don't let our relatively lower royalty rate to Texas fool anybody. And then our policy analyst Carter Swanson on Friday in Albuquerque Journal and soon to be across the state uh, talked about the sovereign wealth and permanent funds, $58 billion, when New Mexico's got a lot of things that it needs to address, and whether it's a dividend like Alaska has, or just eliminating the state income tax, or whatever it might be, New Mexico could and should be doing a lot more to improve right now than it is. And sitting on that money in future government spending coffers is not the correct approach. So check that piece out from Carter Swanson. It's on heirsoфenchantment.com, as are most of the subjects that we discussed today. So with that, thank you for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.